Good morning. Sisters and brothers, thank you, Brother Hunt, for inviting me, and sisters and brothers at the United Steelworkers. I'd like to just begin by acknowledging the Indigenous lands. I'm one of the honorary witnesses to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I'd like to acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples on whose traditional lands we're meeting today, and to bring you greetings from my colleagues at the Chinese Canadian National Council. Sisters and brothers, the Canadian economy is fragile. We have too many people unemployed today, some 1.4 million Canadians, according to the government. The unemployment rate for youth, for young graduates, newcomers is especially high, and this is the case for all demographic groups. We're, quite frankly, we are in a slump. And the reason is the federal government is focused on the fiscal deficit as opposed to the jobs deficit. So they have it backwards. Right now, the federal spending is being suppressed. It should actually be ramped up to get people back to work, at least until the private investment in the economy starts to roll out. And we're seeing this tragic policy mistake in all other developed economies. Now, the odd thing is, against this backdrop, the federal government's been approving temporary foreign worker applications, some 338,000 in 2012. Now, many of these workers are going to Alberta and Saskatchewan, where the unemployment rate is lower than the national average, and where the number of unemployed to vacancy ratios are lower than what we're seeing across Canada. But a large number are being approved for some of the urban areas, including Vancouver with 34,000 temporary foreign workers, and Toronto with 64,000. The government and business groups claim that there are skills shortages, and this may be the case perhaps for some very specific, special cases, but the reality is that we have a jobs shortage in Canada, not a skills shortage. And what has happened is that this current economic situation fosters resentment towards temporary foreign workers, and it tends to racialize the debate. And what we have done recently is we have called for a moratorium on accepting any further temporary foreign worker applications, at least until the economy recovers. And I just want to be clear, CCNC joins USW in supporting a properly run temporary foreign worker program. One that is responsive to real labor shortages. And this program must have the full support of Canadians. It should require a thorough check for the availability of Canadian workers and include regulations and services to offer temporary foreign workers protection from exploitation and provide them with a path to permanent residency and citizenship. The federal government assurances in the 2013 budget are simply inadequate, and what we need is a meaningful, transparent, and accountable review and redesign of the temporary foreign worker program. We're astounded with the RBC case and this very deliberate effort that we're seeing in the banking sector to lay off long-term IT staff and outsource their jobs. And can you imagine the explanation that was given? What did they say? RBC said they didn't hire temporary foreign workers to replace Canadian workers. RBC contracted a third party to hire temporary foreign workers and overseas workers to replace Canadian workers. So, do you see the difference? Businesses should not be allowed to use temporary foreign workers to displace already employed Canadians, either directly or indirectly. These decisions are hurting the Canadian economy because, the business spending is our income. And we take that income and we spend it. When we spend it, that's the business's income. And if businesses then choose to reduce costs by hiring temporary foreign workers instead of Canadian workers, then their families don't have enough income. And then the personal consumption economy will remain suppressed. Businesses cannot expand because they're not receiving enough income from consumers, and the economy remains in a slump. And this has been the situation for the last 3 years. Now let's just turn very quickly to the HD mining case. There are a couple issues here right off the top, and maybe I need to throw it out there for some consideration. First, why are we exporting coal to China? Right? This venture would contribute to greenhouse gases, and actually China has an abundance of coal. But on the other hand, there are opportunities for good jobs and local economic development. I'm working under the assumption that with the support of the First Nations, that we support this export model. Second, Chinese companies tend to bring their own workforce overseas to work in the resource sector. So if they go to Greenland or Ukraine, Iran, Libya, Africa, they would ask, why can't we do this here? Well, the short answer is, it's not the approach here. The approach here, if you're investing here, if you're conducting business here, is that the jobs go to Canadians first. Now, companies, the company claims that they did that, and that applicants didn't meet their criteria, their language criteria, I guess, and this is disputed by numerous unions. But I need to ask, how did we get here in the first place? Why did the provincial government approve this in the first place? Apparently, HD Mining had told the government that they wanted to bring in their own workers. Now, we should have turned them down flat right from the start, and we should have insisted on Canadian labor. We should have insisted on Canadian labor and a training plan for Canadian workers with perhaps some flexibility for their senior management. This has been a debacle, but it's a learning experience for all future large-scale foreign investment projects in BC and in Canada. I think in future we need to insist that there's a labor plan developed and filed with consultations with the unions and the local First Nations before any project is approved. And this would help. And this would help to avoid misunderstandings. Finally, I just want to touch on the precarious employment situation faced by temporary foreign workers. I want to acknowledge the work of the United Steelworkers in supporting the workers when they get here, signing them up. We're hearing, in various news reports of rampant exploitation by the employers, even some cases of borderline trafficking. What we do need is a better run program, and it needs to start from the recruitment phase. You've heard of some cases where the recruiters are asking for large fees in advance before referring the name along. And we need some safeguards in place for workers when they are here, so that they feel free and relaxed to make a complaint if the situation is unreasonable. And we also need a path to permanent residency and citizenship for all temporary foreign workers. Now, currently, only skilled temporary foreign workers have this path. So we should extend it to the unskilled workers as well. If they're good enough to work here, good enough to live here. The Metcalf Foundation, has issued an extensive report on the precarious employment situation, and they did this last year. So, we don't need any more studies. What we need is action by the federal and provincial governments. And I'd like to just conclude with, my recommendation to United Steelworkers. It is to continue to sign up the temporary foreign workers when they get here. The marginal costs, of course, yes, they may be a little bit higher, but it is through this solidarity with the temporary foreign workers, with community groups, with First Nations communities, that we will build a properly run temporary foreign workers program. Thank you very much.